Hi, I'm AJ with Humbucker Soup. In this video, I'm going to teach you how to set up your pickup winder. Now, one thing that you need to determine on your own before we get started is how many winds you want per pickup. For example, I think a lot of beginners will start out with 5,000 winds of 42 gauge wire per bobbin. But if you're like me and you like your pickups like you like your coffee, which is hot, you may need more than that. And don't worry, we won't judge you if you like cold coffee. So sometimes I even jump up to a 43 gauge wire because it has more resistance per foot and it's thinner, so you can get more winds on a bobbin before you run out of room. But how do you determine exactly how many you need? Well, resistance is not a good thing to wind to, but it can help you as a reference point. For example, this wire has a certain resistance rating per foot. And if you were to measure around your bobbin, you could calculate roughly how many turns it would take you to hit a certain amount of resistance. And that's just a good starting point. You can always adjust when you make more pickups down the road. The next thing I want to talk about is setting up the bobbin on the winder. And depending on what type of winder you have, this could be a different process. I actually had to modify this one earlier because these bobbins wouldn't fit over the stud. So it's just held on there with some double-sided tape. But normally, it would look something like this. Now the next thing is, at some point, you need to connect your coil wire to the lead wire. And when you have your coil wire, it needs to be standing up just like this. And you can either put it on the ground or elevate it a little bit, but it needs to be standing up so the wire can freely come over the top of it. The next thing you need to do is set up the limiters. These should be set up, you can use calipers, but you want these to be just a little bit narrower than the width of the bobbin. That keeps the wire from going over the edge or actually breaking. I think a general rule of thumb is usually somewhere around 10 to 30 thousandths from each edge. Now, if you set this up wrong, there's a few different things that can happen. If you get it too wide, the wire will start to build up on the edges and it'll be low in the middle. If you don't go out far enough, you could end up with a hump in the middle. And if your bobbin isn't square or it's not on the machine properly, you could end up getting a little bit of an offset. At the end of the day, as long as it's a complete coil, it'll probably work just fine, but it may affect the sound to some extent. The next thing that you need to determine is the direction that you want to wind the coils. And this can be a little bit of a touchy subject depending on who you talk to. The way that I do it, and the way I believe a lot of the big companies do it, is by winding both coils in the same direction. Then when you wire it together at the end, you wire it to where the flow goes through one of the coils backwards. Now you can wind these in opposite directions, but I highly recommend doing your own research on how to wire it when you're done. Now the way you determine which direction the coil is wound is by looking at it straight on. Now if you have your lead wire on here, you have to kind of visualize once everything's set up which way the wire is going on to the coil. So if it's going on this way, it's counterclockwise. If it's going on this way, it's clockwise. But you also have to keep in mind that when you set up your winder, it also has a clockwise and counterclockwise rotation, which is the way that this will spin. But it will also depend on whether you put the bobbin on there forwards or backwards. So just make sure that you're aware of this and you take all these things into account when you set yours up. So now that you've got your coils wound and you start putting your humbucker together, it's going to look something like this. So you're going to have your start and ending wires for each coil, and then you're going to have your 4-conductor wiring over here. And then the braided wire is grounded to the base plate. So these all need to be soldered together, and then you can heat shrink them and hide them before you tape it off. Now the most common way of wiring these is if you have a slug side of your coil, the start of the slug is usually hot, and the start of the adjustable side is usually ground, and then you wire the two finishes together. So I hope you found this to be helpful, and we'll see you on the next one.